Ever notice how people panic when you stop talking? That discomfort you create is your greatest weapon of all. What if your quietness is actually a threat? There's something deeply unsettling about someone who doesn't need to fill every second with noise. We live in a world that worships constant communication, where every thought gets broadcasted, every feeling gets validated, every opinion gets shared. But here's what nobody tells you. The people running the show aren't the ones talking. They're the ones listening. They're the ones watching everyone else scramble to explain themselves while they sit back, absorb everything, and strike when the moment's right. Think about the last time you were in a tense conversation. Maybe a negotiation, maybe a confrontation, maybe just an uncomfortable social situation. Who had the power? The person explaining, justifying, defending, or the person who just looked at them and waited? Silence creates a vacuum that people rush to fill. And in that rush, they expose everything. Their weaknesses, their fears, their true intentions. You didn't have to interrogate them. You didn't have to manipulate them. You just had to shut up and let human nature do the work. Here's where it gets darker. Throughout history, the most effective intelligence operations weren't built on elaborate spy networks or high-tech surveillance. They were built on one simple principle: let people talk themselves into corners. During the Cold War, some of the most valuable information came from targets who simply couldn't handle silence during conversations. They'd fill the void with details they never intended to share, not because they were tortured, not because they were bribed, but because their brains couldn't tolerate the emptiness. Your brain is wired the same way. It's been programmed since childhood to associate silence with danger. Why are you so quiet? What's wrong? Say something. This conditioning runs so deep that most people would rather say something stupid than say nothing at all. And that's exactly how they lose. Every single time. Because the person who controls their need to speak controls the entire interaction. Ancient warriors understood this at a level we've completely forgotten. They treated words like ammunition, finite, valuable, not to be wasted. When they spoke, it carried weight because they didn't waste breath on empty noise. Silence wasn't awkwardness to them. It was power conservation, strategic positioning. And when they finally did speak, people listened. Not because they spoke loudly, but because they spoke rarely. But what happens when you actually start using this in real life? The results are almost disturbing. Why silent people always win negotiations. Let me tell you about a psychological technique that's been weaponized by everyone from hostage negotiators to corporate raiders. It's called tactical silence, and it's brutally simple. You make your offer, then you shut up completely. You don't elaborate. You don't justify. You don't fill the awkward pause. You just sit there and let the other person's brain eat itself alive. And here's what happens. Within 30 seconds, they start making concessions you never even asked for. This works because humans are neurologically programmed to interpret silence as rejection. Your brain literally can't tell the difference between social rejection and physical pain. They light up the same neural pathways. So when you create silence in a high-stakes conversation, you're essentially inflicting psychological discomfort on the other person. Not through words, not through threats, just through absence. And to make that discomfort stop, they'll give you almost anything. Wall Street players have known this forever. Watch any documentary about major corporate acquisitions, and you'll notice something strange. The people who walked away with billions weren't the ones making passionate pitches. They were the ones who stated their terms and then went completely silent. Days of silence, weeks sometimes, while the other side panicked, revised their offers, talked themselves into worse deals. The silent party didn't have to do anything except wait. Patience became leverage. There's a reason why the most successful interrogators don't use enhanced techniques anymore. They use silence. They ask a question and then just stop. 5 minutes of nothing. 10 minutes. The suspect, unable to bear the void, starts confessing to things they weren't even asked about, elaborating on details that weren't in question, building their own cage one word at a time. And the interrogator still hasn't said a single additional word. That's not just effective. That's devastating. But here's the really twisted part. This doesn't just work on criminals or business opponents. It works on everyone. Your boss, your colleagues, your friends, even your family, because everyone is carrying around the same biological wiring that makes silence feel like a threat. And most people will do anything to make that threat go away. They'll explain themselves, apologize for nothing, agree to things they don't want, all because you refuse to fill the silence. Now ask yourself, how many times have you been on the other side of this? How many times have you talked yourself into a worse position simply because you couldn't handle 10 seconds of quiet? How many times have you given away information, power, or leverage just to avoid the discomfort of saying nothing? And if silence is this powerful in professional settings, imagine what it does to personal relationships. How talking too much destroys your power. Relationships are where silence becomes either your greatest asset or your fatal flaw, and most people get this catastrophically wrong. They think communication means constant talking. They think intimacy requires explaining every feeling. They think love means never letting a moment go unspoken. But here's the truth. People who talk too much in relationships hand over all their power before the conversation even starts. Every time you over-explain yourself, you're training the other person that you can be pressured into justifying your actions. Every time you fill an uncomfortable silence with nervous chatter, you're showing them that discomfort controls you. Every time you need to vocalize every emotion, you're making yourself completely predictable. And predictable people don't command respect. They get managed. Look at how arguments actually work. Who wins? It's never the person who presents the most logical points. It's never the person who explains their position most clearly. It's the person who stays calm while the other person unravels. And you know what calm looks like? Silence. Not defensive silence. Not angry silence. Just composed, unshakable quiet. That kind of silence forces the other person to confront themselves. Their accusations hang in the air with no response to bounce off. Their anger has nowhere to land, and eventually, it consumes them instead of you. There's a manipulation tactic used by high-functioning narcissists that perfectly illustrates the dark side of this. It's called the silent treatment, but it's not what most people think. It's not about ignoring someone. It's about creating calculated voids of response that make the other person question their own reality. They do something you don't like. You don't argue. You don't defend. You just go silent. And their brain starts filling in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. Did I overreact? Am I the problem? Am I losing them? They manipulate themselves while you do nothing. Now, I'm not advocating you become a sociopath, but understand the mechanism. Silence creates space. And in that space, people project their fears, insecurities, and doubts. If you can stay silent while they're projecting, you gain insight into their psychology that they'd never consciously reveal. You become the mirror that shows them themselves. And that's uncomfortable as hell for them, but it's strategic gold for you. Here's the practical application. Next time someone tries to drag you into drama, tries to provoke you, tries to make you defend yourself unnecessarily, just don't engage. Let the accusation die in the air. Let the provocation fall flat. Watch how quickly they lose steam when there's no fuel for the fire. Watch how they start questioning their own attack when you don't give them the satisfaction of a defense. Your silence becomes their problem, not yours. If you've ever used silence to flip a situation in your favor, drop power in the comments. Tell me, when was the last time you lost an argument simply because you talked too much? Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, because we're just scratching the surface of this game. But what if there's a darker reason you've been conditioned to never shut up? What if society needs you to keep talking? Let's go somewhere uncomfortable. Why does every modern system push you to constantly vocalize everything? Social media platforms reward you for every post, every share, every comment. Schools punish students who don't participate verbally. Job interviews measure your ability to articulate yourself, which really means talking even when you have nothing meaningful to say. Corporate culture values communication skills over actual competence. Why? Because people who talk constantly are easy to track, predict, and control. Think about it from a data perspective. Every word you type, every voice message you send, every opinion you broadcast is a data point. And enough data points create a complete psychological profile. Tech companies don't just want your information. They want you addicted to expressing yourself so they can harvest your patterns, your vulnerabilities, your triggers. Silent people are invisible to the algorithm. They're ghosts in the system. And systems hate ghosts. Now look at who actually holds power in this world. The real decision makers. The people running trillion-dollar funds. The intelligence community. The actual architects of policy and control. You barely hear from them. They don't tweet. They don't do podcast tours. They don't write memoir after memoir. They operate in silence because silence is operational security. Every word you say is a potential leak. Every opinion you express is a vulnerability that can be exploited. True power moves in darkness and speaks only when necessary. There's a concept in espionage called information compartmentalization. You only know what you need to know, and what you don't know, you can't accidentally reveal. This is why people in genuinely sensitive positions are trained to be verbally minimal. Not because they're antisocial, but because every word is a potential entry point for an adversary. Silence isn't just power, it's security protocol. Here's something they don't teach in school. Every major shift in power throughout history started in silence. Real conspiracies, not the crazy theories, but actual coordinated movements of power, they all happen in closed rooms without recordings, without witnesses. Why? Because silence is the only defense against total surveillance. And we live in an era of total surveillance. Every device around you is potentially listening. Every digital interaction is logged. But thoughts kept silent? Those are still yours. This isn't paranoia. This is situational awareness. And if you want real power in the modern world, you need to learn to move in silence, to plan without announcing, to execute without explaining. Because the moment you telegraph your intentions, you give the world ammunition to stop you. One of the fundamental laws of power states this clearly. Always say less than necessary. It's not a suggestion, it's a survival principle. So if silence is this valuable, why will most people never master it? Why? Only predators understand real silence. Here's the brutal truth. Most people will live their entire lives never understanding the power of silence because understanding isn't enough. You have to rewire decades of social conditioning. You have to face the terrifying possibility that being misunderstood is part of the price of power. You have to accept that silence makes you outsider. And that's too much for most people to handle. Look at nature. Every apex predator is silent. The great white shark doesn't announce its presence. The owl doesn't warn the mouse. They move in absolute silence because noise is wasted energy and tactical disadvantage. Humans forgot this. We broadcast everything. We announce our moves. We share every strategy. We become prey that self-identifies. We've voluntarily given up every evolutionary advantage silence provides. There's a concept from ancient combat philosophy few people know about. Active emptiness. It's not just being quiet. It's cultivating an internal state where you're completely present and aware, but energetically invisible. You're in the room, but your presence doesn't ripple the water. You absorb without emitting. And when you master this, you become essentially unreadable. People can't categorize you, can't predict you, and what they can't predict, they instinctively fear. Control systems hate silent individuals. Because silence is autonomy. It's a refusal to participate in the game of social approval. And control systems depend on your need for approval. When you stop seeking validation through words, when you become comfortable in your own silence, you break free. You become an independent agent. And independent agents are unpredictable, dangerous, impossible to manipulate. Let me give you a practical exercise. Tomorrow, pick one conversation where you'd normally talk a lot. Could be a meeting, a phone call, a social gathering. Do an experiment. Only speak when absolutely necessary. When someone asks you something, wait 5 full seconds before answering. Watch how people react. Watch how they try to fill the void. Watch how they project their own insecurities onto your silence. And pay attention to how you feel. It's going to be uncomfortable. Your brain will beg you to speak, to explain, to normalize things. Resist. That discomfort is the price of evolution. Here's the final secret nobody tells you. Truly powerful people don't need to prove they're powerful. They just are. And you know they are because they don't try to convince you. Their silence speaks louder than any motivational speech, louder than any display of force. Because real power is quiet. It's invisible. Until the moment it isn't. You've got two choices now. Keep being another voice in the noisy crowd, or become the silence everyone tries to fill. Most will choose the first option. It's safe, comfortable, socially acceptable. But you made it this far. That already separates you from 99% of people. If you're going to try this technique, drop silence in the comments. And answer me this. Do you think you can actually handle 10 seconds of silence in a tense conversation? Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to learn when to shut up. Because this information is real power, and real power is rare. This content is for educational and philosophical purposes. Silence techniques should be applied with ethical responsibility, and never with the intention to manipulate, harm, or control others in destructive ways.